She sat alone by the wide window of her quiet Malibu home, the Pacific wind brushing softly against the glass. The sun was setting, one of those slow golden California sunsets that seemed to melt into the ocean. And Julia Roberts, at a stage of her life far calmer than the decades behind her, watched it in silence. Beside her was a small wooden box. No diamonds, no scripts, no trophies. Just a stack of letters she never sent. For years, people believed she had everything: success, beauty, fame, and a place in Hollywood history that no one could take from her. But in those quiet weeks before she stepped away from the industry, before she withdrew from the lights and the chaos, she finally allowed herself to say something she had buried for decades. "It's strange," she whispered to a close friend one evening. "People think regrets come from mistakes, but sometimes they come from the things we were too afraid to choose." It was the confession that stunned even those who thought they knew her best. One regret so personal, so painfully human, that it had followed her through every award, every premiere, every smile shown to the world. Before we go deeper into the untold truth she revealed, take a moment to subscribe so you won't miss the stories that remind us how fragile even the brightest lives can be. Born in Smyrna, Georgia in 1967, Julia's journey began long before the lights found her. To understand the weight of that unspoken regret, we have to return to the beginning, back to the humid summers and gentle hills of Smyrna, Georgia, where Julia Fiona Roberts grew up in a small, modest home filled with books, music, and constant financial anxiety. Her parents, Betty, Lou, and Walter, ran a small acting workshop. It was a place filled with creativity, but not stability. Some nights were loud with laughter from students rehearsing in the living room. Other nights were quiet, almost tense when bills stacked higher than the family's hope. Julia was just a girl then, a shy child with enormous eyes, watching the world carefully, quietly. She learned early that dreams were fragile things. Her father left when she was 4, and though she spoke lovingly of him later in life, the separation carved a thin, invisible scar across her childhood. The kind of scar that teaches you to smile even when your heart trembles. The air in that house often smelled of old wood, reheated dinners, and the faint scent of stage makeup from her mother's late-night rehearsals. Julia would sit on the floor, tracing circles on the carpet, listening to adults talk about the beauty and pain of performing. She didn't know it then, but those nights would plant the seeds of everything she would one day become. Her resilience, her vulnerability, and even the silent fear that fed her greatest regret. But the tender moments stayed with her too. Her brother Eric would lift her onto his shoulders, insisting she would be the lucky one. Her mother would whisper, "You're meant for something big, Julia." They believed it, even before she did. And yet, in that small Georgia home, one truth echoed louder than the rest. Every dream comes with a cost, and Julia Roberts would soon discover just how high that cost could be. Fame didn't arrive gently. It struck like lightning. Julia was barely out of her teens when Hollywood noticed her. First with curiosity, then with something close to awe. Her presence was unlike anything the industry had seen in years. The warmth of a southern sunrise, the laughter that filled entire rooms, and those unmistakable eyes that could shift from joy to heartbreak in a single frame. Her breakthrough came with Mystic Pizza, a small film that no one expected to become a cultural touchstone. Yet it was Steel Magnolias that transformed her from a promising young actress into a phenomenon. Hollywood likes to pretend it creates stars, but sometimes a star simply appears, and everyone else scrambles to catch up. Julia was that kind of star. Then came Pretty Woman. The world watched her walk across the screen, and something in the air changed. She became America's sweetheart overnight, gracing magazine covers, lighting up talk shows, becoming the face of the new Hollywood dream. She was adored, celebrated, chased, photographed. People fell in love with her before they even understood why. But behind the dazzling premieres and dazzling interviews, tiny cracks began to appear. The pressure of perfection, the endless schedules, the fear that a single misstep could shatter the image everyone believed in. In hotel rooms between flights, she would sometimes sit in silence, wondering if success was supposed to feel this lonely. Her relationships became front-page news. Her laughter became a brand. Every choice she made, professional or personal, was analyzed, debated, dissected. And the higher she climbed, the more fragile the ground beneath her felt. Yet she kept going. Movie after movie, applause after applause. The flame inside her burned bright, but every flame, no matter how brilliant, casts a shadow. And it was in that growing shadow that the first hints of her lifelong regret began to form. The world believed Julia Roberts was unstoppable, a woman carried effortlessly by the wave of fame, as if she were made for the spotlight and the spotlight was made for her. But fame, even the brightest kind, casts long shadows. And as the 1990s pushed into the early 2000s, those shadows began to follow her more closely than ever before. It wasn't a single event that shifted her path. It was accumulation, quiet, slow, almost invisible to the public eye. Exhaustion from years of nonstop filming, relationships strained by travel and distance, the overwhelming pressure of being America's sweetheart, a title she never asked for but could never escape. Every smile she gave the cameras felt a little heavier. Every interview came with questions that cut closer than they should have. She once admitted privately to a friend, "I sometimes feel like the whole world knows me, except for me." Rumors swirled, as they always do, stories of stress, anxiety, emotional burnout. Hollywood rarely talks about these things. It prefers perfect images, perfect headlines, perfect people. But Julia, behind the shimmering curtains of her success, was human. And humans crack long before they break. There were days she would return home after a long shoot, sit in the quiet of her hallway, and simply breathe. Slow, shaky, unsure whether she was catching her breath or losing it. She felt pieces of herself slipping through the roles she played. The line between the woman on screen and the woman in the mirror grew thinner and thinner until she struggled to tell them apart. Her mother's illness weighed heavily on her. The passing of close friends reminded her of time, of fragility, of choices she had postponed. The relentless noise of Hollywood made her long for silence. Not the glamorous kind, but the real, grounding kind only life away from cameras could offer. So gradually, almost imperceptibly, Julia stepped back. Fewer red carpets, fewer interviews. Roles chosen for the soul, not the spotlight. People thought it was strategy, but in truth, it was survival. And it was in this quiet, stripped-down chapter of her life that the regrets she carried for decades began to surface. Clearer, sharper, impossible to ignore. Weeks before she stepped away from Hollywood, Julia Roberts found herself living a life that felt almost unfamiliar. Her home in Malibu had grown quieter, the hallways less crowded with assistants, stylists, or the endless parade of studio people who once filled her days. For the first time in decades, the silence wasn't frightening. It was honest. She would wake early, long before the sun broke over the horizon, and sit on the back porch with a cup of tea. The ocean breeze would brush her hair, and for a few minutes each morning, she felt something she had rarely known in her youth: stillness. It was in those quiet mornings that she began to confront the truth she had avoided for so long. One evening, a close friend visited her, someone who had seen her rise, fall, stumble, and rebuild. They talked for hours about movies, family, mistakes, motherhood, aging, and then, almost without warning, Julia said it. "I spent so much of my life giving the world what it wanted," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "But I never gave myself what I needed." Her friend looked at her, confused but patient. Julia continued, "My biggest regret isn't a role I didn't take. It isn't a relationship that failed. It's that I never let myself slow down long enough to be present with the people I loved. I was always somewhere else, on a plane, on a set, in a script, in someone's dream of who they needed me to be. I missed things, important things." She pulled out a small wooden box, the same one she kept by the window. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written to people she loved, but never sent. "I wrote these over the year," she said. "Every time I felt something I didn't know how to say out loud, but I kept them hidden. I was afraid of burdening people with my honesty." When asked why now, why confess after decades of silence, Julia looked toward the window. The sky had turned a soft, bittersweet orange. Because stepping away from Hollywood made me see the truth. I gave my life to the world, but the world never asked for my heart. I should have saved more of it for the people who cared. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown. It wasn't a whispered goodbye. It was a realization, a gentle but devastating one. A woman who had given so much to millions was finally admitting what she had withheld from herself. And in that moment, as the last light faded behind her, Julia understood the cost of a dream fulfilled too fully. Kin hung loi noi koi kung qua gyai, John hui huang ai vang lin, babiet kon hung ju kong the lele, shiko the ging yu. When Julia Roberts finally stepped back from the lights, Hollywood did something unusual. It paused. Not because she retired with a grand announcement, or because she orchestrated a farewell tour of interviews and magazine covers. No, Hollywood paused because, for the first time, one of its brightest stars chose silence over spectacle. And in that silence, people began to understand the scale of what she had offered the world. Her legacy isn't just a list of films, though Pretty Woman, Erin Brockovich, Notting Hill, and countless others remain woven into the fabric of American cinema. It isn't just the awards, the nominations, or the box office numbers that defined an era. Her true legacy is something quieter, more enduring. The warmth she brought to the screen, the emotional truth she carried into every role, the way audiences felt seen through the characters she portrayed. Away from the cameras, Julia devoted herself to something she had long postponed: her family, her home, and the slower, steadier rhythms of a life she had craved without fully realizing it. She supported humanitarian projects, donated to education and women's health initiatives, and helped fund small community programs that almost never made the headlines. These weren't the acts of a star trying to maintain relevance. They were the choices of a woman who finally gave herself permission to be whole. Her friends often say she became softer, calmer, more centered, someone who had nothing left to prove, except perhaps to herself. Today, people still watch her films in late-night reruns, still quote her lines, still smile at the spark she brought into every frame. In small theaters, in quiet living rooms, in passing conversations, Julia Roberts lives on, not as a distant icon, but as a reminder that even the brightest lights carry shadows, and even the most celebrated lives are shaped by private regrets. What remains after all the applause fades is a simple question. When we give so much of ourselves to the world, what do we keep for the ones we love? And perhaps a deeper question still, in the end, is legacy measured by what we achieve or by the hearts we finally learn to hold close?